Hi, everybody. My name is Daniella Devine, and I'm here with Evita Miller. We met in our top tier certification program, top tier TC, and we're both entering this new chapter of working with investors, mostly creative investors, folks that are buying properties creatively. And navigating those transactions for them. So we kind of wanted to just touch base and open up the conversation and start to talk about what a TC is, what a TC does for these kind of folks, and why having a TC in these deals matters. So I'm curious, like, what is your first, like, if you had three things, what is a TC? How would you roll that out?
So I think number one, they're the connector. Because they are connecting everyone that's involved. Whether they're interacting with each other or not, they're that centerpiece. I think the second thing would be they're the glue that holds it together as far as organization. Investors and just deals in general can be chaotic. It can be confusing. And so I think there's somebody that is studying this. They're familiar with it. They have the sources to find the answers you need to make sure that you're staying on top of things to make sure that deal goes through appropriately and through the right channels. And I think the third thing, I think honestly, they're just your helper. They're your support system. They're in your corner to, if things are going well, they'll cheer you on and we'll get it through quicker. And if they're not, that's okay. We'll hold your hand and, hey, let's figure this out together, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely couldn't agree more. And I think I'd take it, especially like in my last couple files, I think I would take it a step further. I'm working with folks that are definitely high performing, like really professional wholesalers. And sometimes they're dispositioning these properties and sometimes they're holding these properties. Mm-hmm. And they're folks that have been doing it, just this investment exchange, a lot longer than I have. And then I've had a couple people that have been really new in investments and in the real estate world. And, you know, technically I'm still pretty new in comparison to, you know, folks that have been doing this for years and years, whether on the traditional side or, you know, whatever you want to call it. And what I'm seeing is that TCs have a way of coming off polished and investors have a way of kind of coming off shifty. And that's like, you know, like it's
not, yes.
It's not a bad thing. It just, it's like, it's sort of this ongoing perception, I feel like, in real estate where, you know, especially I'm from like the San Francisco Bay Area, and I don't know what it's like in Phoenix particularly, but there's a ton of really high-end real estate here. And the market is mostly dominated by really high-end real estate agents. And they hear the word investor and they feel like, oh, right, an investor.
It's very apparent in the body language you receive sometimes.
Feels like a low-end perception.
It's not always, but I definitely think there's moments where you can just tell they're already kind of on guard of like, all right, go ahead, you know.
Here we go. Like, what BS am I going to hear now?
And or I don't know if it's too that people are, because it's such a mix of experienced and non-experienced, that like obviously now we've got these buzzwords of creative finance and people like Pace Morby and stuff that are helping these things catch on, or the wholesalers and stuff, to where I don't know if it's too that there's newer people coming in and saying they're investors and they're like used to dealing with one side, and then you come in and they're just like, what are you doing? You know? So I don't know if it's a little of that, but yeah, no, there's definitely there's a vibe around it sometimes.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know,
we change that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, you know, having a TC in your deals, like the role of the TC is really to professionalize your business. I mean, we are you literally drop off the purchase contract at our quote unquote house. Yeah. And we correct it, we nurture it, we make sure that everything is exactly as it should be. And that sounds really basic, but on some of the stuff I'm doing right now, it's really complicated. It's going, okay, there's down payment assistance and we can't pay it off as a second lien. So now we need to change this into an executory contract. And now we've got to pull in an attorney. And I'm the one navigating all that. And I'm the one that the agent's calling, the seller, the buyer, the private money lender, the wholesaler. Sometimes there's 8 people on these transactions and they don't want to talk to each other anymore once the contracts are signed. They want to talk to me. And so we're in a position in these transactions of really, it's like you said, it's like holding those spokes together, and the stuff that we have to hear, the language we have to hear from title and escrow on a daily basis, and like how every single settlement statement is different from a different title and escrow company, and title commitments look different, and title reports look different. And
that's what people don't recognize too, is that like everywhere has their own process.
Yes.
I think you inadvertently touched on right there when people are like, what do you even do? Because I think there's this misconception of like, okay, you're not writing the contracts, you didn't bring me the deal, you don't have money in it's kind of like, so what are you working on? You know, and I feel like you just listed a number of things that like, that's what you're working on. That's why it's important, is to have that knowledge of, well, you're doing this deal and I know this title company will work with us on that. Or I happen to know they prefer it this way. You
that's
know,
a big one.
That's super important.
That's a super big one, because sometimes we're coming to them with like ultra creative transactions where it's, 20 grand seller carryback, and, one first lien existing taken sub 2, second lien handled by a PM, a private money lender, a private money partner. And, then the entire transaction is being taken over by 3 LLCs, and everything's being split 3 ways. And it's just, I feel like when investors come to us sometimes, they're encouraged to joint venture. They're encouraged to JV. They're encouraged to work together. They're encouraged to use private money. And they don't recognize that in the paperwork and the actual process of the transaction, which is where 70% of a real estate acquisition occurs, is in escrow. That's what Pace said. 70% happens in escrow. It's like they have no clue how to send out for signatures, who to get on paperwork, who to talk to, who to ask these questions, how to verify this information. And you start to feel like, I wish I could put it in 5 seconds what we do, because it changes like on every single file what our role really is.
Yes. It molds with each case.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
Have you had pushback from investors that are like, I don't know why I would contract your services?
Yeah. I mean, the bulk of who I've been talking to has been that. I would say yesterday I just went to a networking event, and it was actually refreshing in the fact that it was held by a title company. So that was good, but it meant that going in, this wasn't a sub 2 meetup. This wasn't top tier or anything like that. So I kind of already initially prepared myself of like, we just got to start with the basics, meet some people. But it was really refreshing that at least the people that were there were at least somewhat knowledgeable or interested in creative, or just willing to hear me out when they said, what is it you do? Or, oh, okay, so what is that about? Versus, I mean, the other side is obviously quite frequently you hear like, no clue what that is. Okay, you write contracts. Awesome. You know, things like that are they're assumed, but they're not accurate. Totally. So I think even people just being open-minded to this and hearing you out is huge. Because to your point, a lot of them are just looking at it like, why am I going to spend money on you? What, send an email, and like, it's like, no, each of these deals is crazy, which means the paperwork is just as bad, or there's that many opportunities for it to get messed up, or you think it was good, but if you're not tracking it, watching it, looking over these things, it could easily get messed up.
Where there's like a really funky little thing that happens when people are doing their paperwork and their contracts. It's hilarious to me. On one piece of paper, they'll do, Evita Miller, LLC. And on the next piece of paper, they'll do Evita Miller, LLC. And they don't realize that invalidates their contract.
Right.
They don't realize that tiny little omissions and errors makes it invalid. They don't recognize when they use a sub 2 addendum or a seller acknowledgement that they're actually promising the seller and the client a deed of trust and a promissory note, and everyone signs it. Everyone, including the wholesaler. But when it comes time to paying out of pocket for those 2 notes, for the deed and the note, because the escrow or title refuses to produce it, and you got to hire an attorney, all of a sudden they're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, yeah, that means you're in breach of your contract, bro. Like, it's little things like that where you're going, hey, that's fine, but we need to now write an addendum, or we need to now do this, or we need to now pivot. And it's great that you actually, that's awesome. I want to look into a local title and escrow meetup, because what's funny is that
really cool. It's interesting seeing that side.
Yeah. And like, they know what we're doing because they're communicating with us. Right. They may not understand that kind of transaction yet. Yes. But they're communicating with us. So they know like the things, the language where they're teaching us to use. Yes. They understand.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about getting to that one is that it started with, I was talking to a couple individuals with one like location of the company. I'm not going to say their company name or anything like that, but like I was talking to one location. I actually, in one of Pace's challenges, had reached out to them for like the foreclosure list of like your taking action and stuff. Ended up talking to them a little more, kind of mentioning, hey, I'm just starting this venture in TC stuff. Just wanted to throw it out there, that kind of thing. And then they connected me to their, I think he was marketing, or I forget what his exact title is. But in talking to them, I started just how we kind of talk about in the course of creating these relationships, figuring out what do they do, what are they comfortable with, what do they prefer, things like that. So I kind of opened up that conversation and just something about like, hey, do you guys do any creative deals? Are you familiar with creative? Just testing the waters a little bit. Next thing I know, they're calling me. So we discussed sub 2, and they were like, I don't get this. I don't know if you can do this. Like, do they get the title? I just don't see how that's possible, and you could just tell like the wheels were turning, and they're like, I can't imagine anybody would do this. And so I, of course, I'm not going to say, obviously we know people that do it, but I thought that's okay. So followed up with an email, try to give them some information down the line. So they're now a little bit open to it. I wouldn't say they're completely doing it, but oddly enough, they connected me to this networking event because one of them wasn't going to be able to go. We'll go figure at the networking event. One of the girls there was an escrow from a different location around here. And in talking, they were like, oh, you do creative stuff? You need to talk to her. She does all kinds of creative stuff. And I was like, how crazy that everything kind of ended up leading it together. It was like, here they were, and they were a little iffy. And then there's someone else kind of just different area, same state, same company. And she definitely does it. So now that's opened up a new avenue, of some have no idea what it is and it's terrifying. And they're like, you can't do this, and then others are like, yeah, she was basically like, we have our own processes to it, but as long as you follow that, sure. Yeah. Whatever.
It's crazy how different, like, this is one thing that I feel like if you're in traditional real estate, or if you only focus on one market, that people don't recognize how many terms title and escrow have for the exact same thing in different states. So if you would have used the term subject to, which I did recently in Oregon, they were like,
a what?
A mirror wrap. It's a mirror wrap. Yes,
and I'm like, good too. They came back with, and they're like, so what you're describing as a wrap? And I was like, well,
it is.
I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I'm like, sure. Yeah. As long as you guys do this. Yeah. That's all they're looking to do.
And I've seen documents too. That's like on the warranty deed. That's like wrap around, mirror wrap, things of that nature, even though, terminology wise, we're not necessarily following the transaction in the same way. And I mean, like yesterday, I had to go down this executory contract thing where I'm like, okay, it's called an agreement for sale, an executory contract, agreement for bond. It's got like 4 other names. And so depending on the state,
it's so confusing.
Depending on the state, they're like, what are you talking about? And then I go, okay, this is what it could be called in your state. And they're like, oh, yeah. We're good. And it's a trip because, investors are typically either focusing on like acquisitions, leads, communicating with, direct to seller, direct to agent. They're not sitting there having to learn all these little intricacies that, that's the reason why you pay a TC.
Yes. And like I think that's important too, is to, I guess, let people know, like in this program, we're lucky that we have mentors and things set up for us to learn. But I feel like if you hear somebody say they're a TC, and especially if they're a top tier TC, it's not only opening up a community of people for them to bounce ideas off, questions, get help to where like, even if they can't help you, they can connect you to somebody that helps you. But also we're constantly learning, you know, like you're out there getting deals. We're not cold calling every day, but we are on a Zoom learning that there's 10 different terms for an agreement for sale. We're learning what attorneys are in the area that could help you. We're learning, you know, it's just, it goes on and on and on. And I think that's important that maybe people don't realize too, is that we're not just doing these things and it's not a stagnant process of just like, yep, here's 10 steps, we send 10 emails and it's done. It's we're learning how different each scenario can be and how we can cater to that, keep things legal, keep things appropriate and in both parties' favor, you know, to be that third party that can hopefully guide you in the best way, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, if you go into some of our forums, it's just like the most complex problem solving. And it's so fun because, you know, some people have done hundreds of files in all 50 states and they know exactly what you need to do and exactly who you need to talk to. And that resource bank is just amazing for us. It is an amazing resource. And I mean, Evita, like on average, my email chains when I open escrow and then I close escrow, like 3 to 4 weeks later, it's 50 to 80 emails. It's like,
right.
Who's doing that? Who's tracking that? Who's answering those questions? You know, and
I'm just kidding. Right? This is what you're doing all day. Like
I know. I'm like, what do you mean? Like I just been on the phone for an hour and a half.
But no, I think this is so important to share though, because to that point, I'm like you said, how many times have we heard, have plenty of other TCs heard that same thing? Well, then what do I need you for? What value do I bring? Like, there it is. She gave it 80 phone calls, you know, 20 of them to escrow, waiting on hold, messaging back and forth. I mean,
while treading incredibly diplomatically, because you don't want to offend anyone, because like everyone around you, you have to make them feel like they're the expert. You can't ever come off like your role is to come off as like the bank of information and the gentle educator. You can't ever make a closing attorney, title, escrow feel incompetent or point out something that they did inaccurately, even though settlement statements are like 95% of the time done inaccurately. You know, it's one of those things where you're always treading so cautiously and gently, but also firmly.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's everybody learning together though. Like to that point, I feel like our goal also is never to make people feel incompetent or bad about it. It's just, if anything, it's going to teach us so that we can help somebody else, you know, or maybe we have a different side to that to maybe open their eyes of like, well, hey, have you ever heard of this style? You know, I feel like if we keep trading off, I mean, then everybody succeeds, you know, nobody has to feel like they didn't do it the right way or, you know, they were dumb or whatever. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. It happens. We're busy. We work quick. People just move. If we can just help each other out, we all win.
Exactly. And one of my friends said this once and I really liked it. She's like, we all have our different zones of brilliance. And it's true. Like I don't do what other investors do. And I'm comfortable with that. And so, you know, I think long story short, we nailed it. That's why you should hire a TC.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Evita. I really appreciate it. I hope we can hop on and just like do like some rapid fire questions next time.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right.
We've got more to talk about.
Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely.